Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the co-showrunner of the upcoming M.O.D.O.K series on Hulu, as well as the co-writer of the upcoming M.O.D.O.K Head Games miniseries at Marvel. It's Jordan Blum. Thanks for coming on, Jordan.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to be talking about a whole lot of M.O.D.O.K coming up very soon, which is like the best sentence I have ever said on my own podcast, because I love M.O.D.O.K.
My favorite thing to talk about.
It's a good thing to talk about. But before we get into that, naturally, I'm very curious as to how you ended up at the point where you got to M.O.D.O.K as like a big driver in your life. So I want to start with your comic book origin story. Like, what was it that got you into comics?
So my dad immigrated from Israel when he was, I think, 5, and he didn't speak any English, and he learned English through reading comics. And so as far back as I can remember, they were just there. It was our kind of bonding thing. I think there's pictures of me in a high chair with a Captain America comic. It's just, I think my mom said once the first time she took me to the library, I just beelined it as soon as I saw comics. So, I feel like, yeah, they've always been a part of my life and kind of my truest passion. I wanted to be a comic artist as a kid. I just didn't have any of that talent or discipline to draw cars and perspectives and backgrounds. I just wanted to draw Spider-Man. And I was like, okay, I don't have what it takes, but I'm still going to continue my love fest with it as a reader. So, yeah, I feel like it started, in the early 80s. I think what really helped was that was also when like the first big toy tie-ins were happening. So Superpowers, Secret Wars, it all just blended together for me. The comics, the toys, cartoons. And, from there I was a Superman fan and then a Batman fan. And I think the thing that really hit me the most was X-Men. I just connected with it immediately. I grew up in a town that was mostly Irish Catholic, or Italian Catholic. So I was one of the very few Jews in my town. And, I dealt with some anti-Semitism here and there and felt like an other and connected with this fantasy of being called to the Xavier School to attend with other people who felt like outsiders and had these amazing powers and personalities and that I would, attend the academy and graduate and become an X-Man. And, it's all happening also when the cartoons coming out and the action figures. And it was just like, yeah, X-Men is the thing for me. It's what I love. And that kind of continued on, but I've always been a Marvel DC guy, and then, expanded to Vertigo and Image. And at this point now I'm, I have a very unhealthy Wednesday habit that keeps growing. And I like to try new things and stick with my favorites. And I, follow writers and artists and characters, and it's almost impossible to keep up with. But now I can say it's research.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing that's interesting what you're saying is like when you're growing up, there's like the Superpowers and the Secret Wars and all the toys and everything like that. And I think it's funny because like sometimes you see people like Jim Shooter basically made Secret Wars because he was like, I would really like to sell some toys. And some people look at that as pretty cynical, but at the same time, there was like a whole generation of people who came up because of the toys. They came up because like my first comics were Marvel's Transformers series. Like that got me on board because I love Transformers. I was basically addicted to it. So anything I could get my hands on. And so that got me into comics. But then also X-Men, the animated series. I love sports cards, and they came up with those Marvel Universe trading cards that had like the power ratings and everything on the back. I mean, all that stuff was like, I described it once as like those cards were like Marvel Wikipedia. It helped you understand this. All that stuff was such a great gateway in that period to like get you on board.
Absolutely. It was that, yeah, it's kind of, it's like the California roll to the greater world of sushi, where you had that little taste. And then I was buying the Marvel handbooks and Who's Who. And it was like, there's so much history here. And I wanted to just learn it all. Like I became a student, I feel like, of it. And that's when like Wizard was coming out. So you could, read about, what you should be, stories that highlighting great comics from the past, but also maybe what you should be reading that's coming out soon. And I think that's also the other thing that X-Men appealed to me was it's like the densest continuity.
Yeah.
I loved that challenge where I was like, the Siege Perilous, what the hell is this? And then it's like, I'm going to go in. It's a 17-year run from Claremont. I'm going to try and make heads and tails of this, and started picking up, back issues of that. And I feel like I started becoming a little bit of a completist where I would try and get as many graphic novels or fill in back issues. And I would do like, okay, I'm on to Alpha Flight right now. I'm going to do all of Alpha Flight. Alpha Flight's the thing I'm super into. And then it's like, okay, Justice League International. Like, I love the humor comics. Now I'm just going to work my way through that. And, I think that's the fun of it, is that there's so much out there with so much history, and you can just throw yourself into it.
Well, that is the really cool thing, is back then when we didn't have all the, the internet to be able to like figure this stuff out. I actually, my first comic that I ever got, like that I ever bought myself, was it was in a spinner rack at like a grocery store here in Anchorage, Alaska, and it was the first chapter of Executioner's Song, the crossover, which I'm pretty sure I saw a copy on your bookcase. I saw like a trade paperback.
All-time fave.
Yeah. I mean, like, so that the funny thing though is like getting on board with that, where it was like, Professor X got shot with like the legacy virus somehow, and it was by Cable, but it turns out it wasn't Cable, it was Strife, who is his nemesis, although it's also Strife is his clone. He's not actually his brother, he's his clone. And then you get into all this stuff with like Jean Grey and Cyclops. And I remember reading that, and I think now we look at trying to drink from the fire hose of insanity of continuity as like this problem. But back then, I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. I just wanted to know everything. Like, I got those Marvel handbook, got a Marvel handbook myself. And I remember just being like, I need to understand this. So I'm going to read about every single character. And it helped, but at the same time, just not knowing sometimes was like this weird attraction.
Yeah, it rewards you in a way where you can make your way through X-Men, and then you're like, I don't know about these New Mutants. I got to try this out, which is something funny. I avoided that book like the plague growing up because the Sienkiewicz covers terrified me.
Yes!
They were so scary. Now he's my favorite artist, and New Mutants is my favorite book of all time. And I didn't read it until my late 20s, I think. And it's my favorite X-Men run. So it's, but again, like, there's that whole world where you're like, I know Wolfsbane from X Factor, and I know, these other characters on X-Force, but like, who's Karma? What happened? And then it just sends you down that path where you just want to keep consuming more. And then you get into the Silver Age, and you're trying to, learn the very origins of these bigger characters. And I think that's like the most fun about it, is the challenge ahead of you of learning these universes that are so complex.
Yeah, I am so pleased that you said Bill Sienkiewicz scared you, because that has been a corner that I've been on for a long time, and everyone calls me crazy, to the point where last year I was at New York Comic Con, and I had breakfast with this comics marketing guy, and we were just chatting, and he was like, Bill Sienkiewicz is here, and he's got this new art book coming out. Would you be interested in talking with him? Here's my terrible admission. I have never went back and read New Mutants because the Demon Bear stuff scared me so much when I was a kid. I've never read a single comic drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz because it was so set in my brain that I was scared of Bill Sienkiewicz. Which is amazing, because like I see his like portraits whenever somebody dies, and I'm just like, this guy is like the most incredible artist ever. And yet my child brain has never gotten over that. It's bewildering. So thank you for at least partially being on the same page with me.
I'll give you a money back guarantee that you will love the Demon Bear saga and all the work he did on that book. I'm telling you, it's so, especially knowing your taste, and I know you like kind of more painterly art, it's right up your alley. You should check it out.
Okay, I will for sure. Well, I did want to ask, we're going to get into M.O.D.O.K, but were you always attracted to like the oddballs of the Marvel Universe? Because, I mean, that is one thing that Marvel low-key excels at, is there's a lot of really weird characters. Was that something that appealed to you early on, or is that more of a thing that came later?
No, absolutely. I think, if you want to go back to where I learned about M.O.D.O.K, I'd read him in some, Mark Grunwald Cap stuff, and I loved him there. And then that Iron Man cartoon, I was like, what is this? And I sought out that action figure, that Toy Biz M.O.D.O.K action figure, which actually appears in our pilot in some form. I loved the idea of kind of the Marvel oddities. I love Marvel Comics Presents, because sometimes those characters would get little focus, issues to tell their stories. I love the underdogs. Like, Ant-Man was a big character for me, or even in DC, I would get super into like Firestorm, kind of the lesser known flagship characters because I thought they had the most potential. I like the idea that you just haven't seen them rise to the occasion, that everyone doubts them, but there's something really special there, and it just takes the right story or the right writer or artist to tell it. So yeah, absolutely. I think those are, and even with the X-Men, which is my obsession, like I love Danny Moonstar and Madrox, and the characters who aren't at the forefront. When you think X-Men, like I love Cyclops and Storm and all those characters too. But like to me, I like the deep cuts, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I think that's always been my taste.
I had Jonathan Hickman on the podcast last year, right after House of X and Powers of 10, and we were talking about just fandom and kind of how X-Men fans are, and he said that I'm trying to remember the line specifically, but it was roughly. The interesting thing about X-Men fans is every single X-Men fan thinks that their favorite characters should have their own solo title. Mm-hmm. And so, that goes across the board, whether you love, Danny Moonstar or if you love Glob Herman. It's like, that's just kind of how it works. And I think that's hilarious. I do want to say that I actually have a framed Marvel Universe trading card of Fin Fang Foom on my desk permanently, just because I love Fin Fang Foom so much. That him and Stiltman are probably my two go-tos in terms of the oddballs, but
well, David, you're gonna want to tune into M.O.D.O.K.
Oh my, I'm very interested in that.
Actually, Stiltman, we tried, we didn't get
what
Stiltman.
Somebody else has plans for him.
Insane to me. I don't know if it's a Daredevil thing, but we do have an episode that's set in the bar with no name, and we wanted Stiltman to be the bartender so that if you order something top shelf, he can just But we didn't get him. We used the Orb instead, who's a character I love. So
is the Orb the eye guy from Original Sin?
Yes.
Oh my God, yes, that's incredible. I love the fact that there was an event comic built around the Orb. Anyways, let's move on to your career post being a comic fan. I know you've written and directed shorts and one feature-length film, but you're primarily known as a TV writer. You knew comics are your passion. What set you on a path to becoming a TV writer before getting involved with comics?
So I in college I was more of a director actually, and just kind of started writing out of necessity. And I went to school at Ohio University, and we, myself and friends who I'm still friends with to this day, made a bunch of shorts and got some recognition, and we got internships, and we came out here, and we were working in development and this and that. Everyone, kind of trying to break in, and I got a PA job on American Dad, and connected with a few of the writers there, specifically Chris McKenna, who has written Spider-Man, the two Spider-Man films, and Ant-Man and Wasp, and the whole slew of those things. So we kind of bonded over that and similar sensibilities. And he was nice enough to read some lowly PA's feature script and pass it along to his agent. And I got signed there at UTA from that, and was working in the feature space. And then the second thing I wrote while I was an assistant at American Dad was a big super villain heist movie. And of course it didn't get made because it was a giant, $200 million IP super villain thing. That was kind of, a little similar to The Boys. This is like back in 2009, maybe, or 8. But it got me interviews all over town. Suddenly I was like pitching on a Daredevil movie, or when it was at Fox, and when they wanted to reboot it or do another one, and a few other kind of projects. So it felt so close, like suddenly I was there, and I did a lot of development and stuff like that, and never kind of panned out. And as I was going on these meetings and stuff, I was still our assistant to the showrunners on American Dad, and I became very close with the showrunners, and they would kind of bring me in. We had a very similar story sense. So we would talk about, kind of things that they were working on in the room, and I would just give feedback and stuff. And they were just like, why don't we hire you as a writer? Because in my mind, I was a big sci-fi action, feature guy, not a comedy TV writer. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. Of course. So I got hired on the show, and I'd been a big comedy guy too, but I really got thrown into the deep end, into the writer's room, and kind of had to learn how to flex those muscles and get better at it. And hopefully and luckily I did. And worked on that show for a while, and then I created a show with one of the showrunners that was kind of this superhero animated series. And we went out to Patton, and Patton came on board, and we pitched it, and we sold it to Fox, and it ended up not going for a lot of weird reasons, but it kind of created a relationship with Patton and I, and we'd run into each other at Golden Apple, and have kind of kept up over the years. So I was at American Dad for a long time until I was an executive producer. I did a season over at Community when Dan Harmon came back to the show, and then one of the people I had developed our first series with was at Marvel, and I was like, we gotta have dinner, we gotta talk.
Yeah.
And they had a few things they were excited about, and I was like, well, have you guys considered M.O.D.O.K? He's amazing. Look at him. Look at this Jack Kirby design. And he's just, he's this egomaniac. He thinks he's smarter than every single person in the Marvel universe. His ego is his downfall. Like, he's such this fun voice. And if we could tell some fun stories at A.I.M, kind of some workplace comedy stuff. Marvel was kind of looking for, something in the Archer vein. And then we built this family around them. So we were able to tell kind of family stories and workplace stuff. So yeah, Patton and I went in and we developed it and took it into Jeff Loeb and everyone at Marvel, and they were like on board immediately, and we sold it to Hulu, and we've been working on it since, and it's been an absolute dream. Like, there's never a day I take it for granted that I'm playing in the sandbox and writing dialogue for these characters that mean so much to me.
I do think it's really interesting how even as you were kind of coming up and you're working in these varying jobs, you were always kind of in positions, or at least like involved with projects that were kind of comics adjacent. Like, you were like Chris McKenna was there. Like Community, well, I think the Russos were gone at that point. I mean, the Russos were really famous for doing a whole lot of Community episodes and everything. Yeah. And so I also want to give you credit. The Meow Meow Beans episode of Community is honestly like one of my favorites. It is such a wild episode. That's one you co-wrote, right?
You know who directed it, right?
No.
Comment. Rob Schraub. And I was a big Scud guy growing up. My mom used to let me draw on my walls, which was very cool of her. Draw comic characters. So I had a Scud like up one of my walls, and I bought all the comic stuff. So Rob was very kind at my nerding out over Scud, and brought me a collected edition signed when he was directing our episode. But yeah, it's full circle everywhere, and we were very lucky to work with Rob. Rob's an incredible director.
I had no idea that he directed that. That is absolutely incredible. Because when I was growing up, I mean, I remember having like Scud the Disposable Assassin comics around that was just like, I mean, I was pretty young and I didn't totally understand what was going on, but I kind of loved it. It was very comic booky. But okay, so you gave us the path as to how M.O.D.O.K got his own TV show. I know, I mean, it sounds like you've always kind of loved M.O.D.O.K, but what do you think, what made that character seem like he would be a good fit for something like this? Because I think it's really bizarre. As much as I love M.O.D.O.K, M.O.D.O.K is weirdly having a moment. Like, he's like, M.O.D.O.K is in the Marvel's The Avengers game as like a prominent character, and then there's a show, and then there's like, I have to imagine, I don't know if it's his first solo series that you and Patton are doing, but that's a lot going on at once for a character that is a floating head.
Yeah, M.O.D.O.K's 11 is the only other one I can.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Fantastic. I absolutely love that series. We pulled a lot of stuff from that in the show, and also for our comic. We wanted to make sure that we hit every version of the character. So we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, again, like, it's that you're never going to forget that Jack Kirby design. That's why he's the king. That's why he's the master, is like, he thought of that, and it's burned into your brain. And I love that the character is really versatile. He can be a legitimate threat. He can be brilliant and calculating and hyper violent and scary. I think like some of I've been playing the video game, and I love that version of him. And then other times he can be hilarious, like the idea that this floating head with tiny arms and legs, has wants and desires and frustrations, and, is a complicated character. I think that was so exciting. And I think I love the challenge of making you care about him and invest in him. I think if you read most M.O.D.O.K appearances, he's either kind of a comedic foil or he's a very arch,
Right.
classic Marvel villain. And I really wanted to explore like the life outside of it. Like that guy, when he leaves that Captain America panel, he has to go somewhere. So where does he go? And that was kind of the impetus for the series. And we obviously are doing kind of like an animated, more satirical take on the character, but I think it's very true to who he is, which is that he's a braggart. He's got this huge ego with insecurities to match it, and it's what stops him from conquering the world. And I think he's so driven to do it. He keeps coming back after every defeat, and I love how determined he is. So I think all those things made him this exciting character, and there was so much to pull from because there are these different versions of him, and we get into this in the comics more, but you have like Superior M.O.D.O.K, who falls in love with Maria Hill and has spider arms, and and then you have Mohawk, M.O.D.O.K, who's fighting Gwenpool and it's much more comedic, and then you have much more the classic version who almost defeats the Avengers and almost defeats Iron Man. So I love that. I love that he's not just this one thing, and I think it puts him in the same league as characters like Batman. Batman can be Adam West Batman. He can be Christopher Nolan Batman. He can be Lego Batman. He can be Alan Moore Batman. And I love those kinds of characters that have that flexibility. And I think M.O.D.O.K has that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, we're living in an era where my wife can actually quote Arnim Zola from Captain America: The Winter Soldier. If my wife can quote frickin' Arnim Zola, the world is ready for M.O.D.O.K. But I will say, so you and I, we talked about this over email. We both own Tales of Suspense number 94, which is M.O.D.O.K's first appearance. And like the funny thing is I was rereading that last night in prep, and it reminded me one of the reasons why this idea works so well. And that's because like even in the very first appearance of M.O.D.O.K, you can tell he's a terrible boss. Because all of A.I.M basically just they like literally release Captain America so he can fight M.O.D.O.K and then they can kill both of them at the same time because they're like, this guy sucks. And I like the idea of approaching. I mean, I told you before we started recording that I have a superheroes doing ordinary things themed sketchbook. So I have a proclivity for this type of thing. But there's something about it that just makes sense because he's both like a great fit for the mundanity of corporate life. Like, what is life in A.I.M like with this guy as the boss? But also, what are you when you're not at A.I.M? Like, what are you when you're a floating head and you're going home to watch Netflix or something like that? I just find that to be really fascinating. It's such a good angle.
Yeah, well, just even going back to like him being a bad boss, I don't even remember that A.I.M hired the Serpent Society to assassinate him and kill him. They hated him. He took it over. He was an experiment that evolved so quickly that he was like, I'm not going to be your computer. I'm in charge now, and I will destroy you if you question me. And that's the way he runs his business. And I thought, like, that's his identity, especially if he's been doing this for years and years and years. What happens when you strip that away from him? When he's a control freak, right? Everything has to go the way M.O.D.O.K wants it to go. So what happens when he loses control of A.I.M? And then the same thing with this family, we've created for him is he's sort of taken it for granted. And what happens when he loses that? So, in the pilot, we strip him down. We take everything away from him that makes him M.O.D.O.K or he believes to be important to him. And then we go, well, what's he going to do to fight? What's he going to fight for? What is he going to reinvent himself? Can he change? Because again, M.O.D.O.K is such an arch character. He really has this sense of self that is like, I kill people with my mind blast. I fight the Avengers and I try and take over the world and I run A.I.M with an iron fist. Like, that's it. Those are the bullet points to M.O.D.O.K. And I think to me, it started to like turn into this like midlife crisis. Like, if M.O.D.O.K, who is so set in his ways, like if he can't change, can any of us change? And I thought that was a really interesting journey to take the character on, to kind of strip him of everything and set him at his lowest point and then see what he does.
So basically, you're wondering if he can become a mechanized organism designed only for caring.
Yeah, caring, but he doesn't lose sight of his goals. And I think the other thing that I think will surprise people is, as much as we humanize him, he's a supervillain, and he's going to make some decisions that are going to anger people and people in the show and audiences, hopefully, because he is set in his ways to a degree, and you're going to see some growth and you're going to see some setbacks. And but at the end of the day, as much as we humanize him, he is a supervillain, and we should never forget that.
I love the clip that you guys showed at the beginning of the metaverse panel, because the fact that he was going to kill the dude until he said that he was the person who does his taxes, and so instead he like lasers off somebody else's arm. It felt very on brand. It felt like a good fit.
Yeah, I think that's how he handles his problems, right? Is like a mind, like through fear and a mind blast. So the idea that he signs away the company thinking he's going to be able to continue to do things the way he once did them, and then finds out that he now has to answer to a board and HR and things like that, I think is really interesting, because it's like, you can't mind blast this problem away. They legally own A.I.M. So it makes him have to kind of come up with a new way to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
And Monica gets involved in that, and a bunch of the other characters. So to me, that's a really interesting thing, is to take away the one power that your hero has, and then go, now fight.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we start the show with him. But yes, the guy whose arm he blows off is Gary, who's played by Sam Richardson.
Hell yeah.
And M.O.D.O.K continually gets demoted throughout the show. And Gary, it's kind of like an undercover boss thing, but he's not undercover. He just keeps falling down through the company, through A.I.M. And Gary is the grunt who he has to learn his name and actually form a relationship with, because to him they're all beekeepers that are disposable, and that's where Gary comes in.
I love Sam Richardson. He was the best part of Veep, which is really saying something, and the fact that he's playing Gary is very perfect. I also love the fact that you guys went full out. I mean, A.I.M without the beekeeper suits. No offense to Iron Man 3, but it's kind of like you're losing a little bit of the spice to A.I.M. You gotta, the beekeeper suits are they come with the territory.
They're iconic. I love them. They're like the perfect lackey uniform. I like them more than Hydra because they're so weird. But they're perfect for an evil organization. And then I'm sorry if I keep pimping our comic, but we actually explore why they dress that way, where like the origins
of hell yeah
in the comic. So that's something that we were excited to do, because I feel like A.I.M has just sort of always existed in the Marvel universe, and we kind of want to get to where it comes from.
Well, and I'm fine jumping back between the show and the comic. One thing you almost got into this, but one of the things I really loved about, you did an interview with Oliver Sava from AV Club, where you talked about how the way that you and Patton are approaching M.O.D.O.K Head Games, the comic that's, I think, starting on December 2nd, the first issue is coming out, it's like the Grant Morrison's "What If It All Counted" approach to Batman, because like that was one of the things. I mean, there's a lot of things that were great about Grant Morrison's run on Batman, but like having like Zur-En-Arrh and like all these different versions of the character in there, saying it all counts is like, with Batman is like insane, but M.O.D.O.K's no different. I mean, like, I'm not saying you're going to get into it, but there's like this strange, I don't know if you ever read Strange Tales, the anthology, but like Nick Bertozzi had an amazing story in there about M.O.D.O.K. I mean, you have the modems, and then there's like I don't even remember the name of I don't even know if it had a name, like the Baby and Next Wave that was like between M.O.D.O.K and Modam.
Yes, and there were Elvises and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things. I mean, there's so much different history with this character. And I think that trying to deliver on all the versions of this character we know, that's like, I mean, I think it's a really funny and smart way to approach it. But also, I mean, it must be a very unique challenge to try to do that with a character as insane as M.O.D.O.K.
Yeah, well, I guess I didn't want to discount any of the stories, right? Because when we first started, when the show was sold, I got my Marvel Unlimited, and I was like, let's do this. Like, I had read, a decent amount of M.O.D.O.K. But I went back and I found literally every appearance, or I tracked down the back issue and I read them all. And there were really different takes on the character. And I really like the idea that he's he's a computer brain. He's been destroyed, rebuilt, cloned, every version of that. So to me, those are all, he's been rebooted a bunch of times, and those are all kind of different versions of the same character, to make sense of Gwenpool, M.O.D.O.K, and even, we just saw him get stabbed in Doctor Doom, which I loved. And we put that in the first issue where, he's running through all his files, and you see on these screens all these different versions of the character, because we wanted to recognize that that's what's fun about him, is that you don't know what version you're going to get. I feel like we're writing a version that's a little closer to kind of the classic version of the character, a little more of the Lee Kirby type. There's some humor in it, but ultimately we didn't want to write the M.O.D.O.K we've been writing on the show. We wrote that character and we love that character, but that's not, to us, the 616 Marvel Comics version. So we wanted to write one that was much more dangerous and a little more serious, and someone didn't want to mess with. And I think people will be surprised that, it's an action-packed comic with M.O.D.O.K at the heart of it. It's got this kind of born identity, kind of mystery with him at the center as this action hero. And, each issue we tried to kind of visit a part of his history, because he's trying to solve a mystery about his past and his memories. So we took him through a lot of previous relationships, and a lot of characters who he has interacted with in the past show up as guest stars, because he's revisiting different chapters of his life, trying to make sense of what's going on with him and what's wrong with him. So it was a blast to kind of be like a little Grunwald here, a little, it's we wanted to honor all of it, because I've read it all and I love it all. Yeah.
I love the fact that Marvel Unlimited actually has a section in there. When you go to characters at the top, there's actually a M.O.D.O.K section. I don't know. It's really wild to me, like thinking back to what I would have done if I was like, 6 again, and I had this like app that was literally like I could just click on characters and read all of their comics. It's spectacular.
I would have never left my room. Dragged out of there by my parents to go get fresh air or something.
Yeah. So have you ever read, like, this is another one of my favorite, like, I don't even know if you can call him like a C-list or D-list character anymore, because he's going to be in the Black Widow movie. But like, I always loved Taskmaster. Like, Taskmaster is like such an amazing character, especially now. It's like, put that guy on YouTube, he can do anything. Like, you can find, he's got photo reflexes. It's spectacular. Yeah. But Fred Van Lent and Hefty Paulo had this amazing 4-issue miniseries where they didn't do the same thing, but it was like in the ballpark, where they took this character that sometimes was kind of a joke because he's got the skull face and he just is kind of got a weird power set. And then what they did with him was they basically tried to like dig deep and figure out who this character really is once you get past all of what the world thinks of him. And it's a really fun series, but it's also like really intense in a lot of ways. It kind of it sounds sort of like what you and Patton and Scott Hepburn are doing with the book.
100%. It's absolutely like a tonal cousin. I reread it a year or two ago, maybe, and absolutely loved it.
The Taskmaster book?
Yeah. Fred Van Lent is one of my favorite writers. Like, and again, like, he's all over our show. Like, there's no Monica without Fred Van Lent, like, he created that character and a bunch, and the work he did on M.O.D.O.K's 11 with her and M.O.D.O.K established that relationship too. So yeah, I love that book gets crazy with big ideas, like insane Marvel Universe ideas. I've heard it referred to as like that Marvel bullshit, which I love. But it still grounds the character with a very relatable emotional hook. And I think those are the two things. Is we want this series to just be kind of kitchen sink insanity, but you're super invested, hopefully, in his emotional journey, and it feels very grounded. And there's the serious moments for M.O.D.O.K in the series. So absolutely, you nailed it. Like, that's a huge inspiration.
It seems like, because you've mentioned Kirby a lot, it seems like as far as like tonal and vibe, and especially the visuals of Scott Hepburn, that like Kirby's your guy.
Oh, I live and pray at the altar of Kirby. Yeah, and Scott is channeling him in ways I haven't seen a lot of modern artists do. There's so much of that Kirby energy and style, from the tech in M.O.D.O.K's lab to the Krackles everywhere. I mean, the amount of times I've had to say Kirby Krackle on our show as a reference, like, I don't know if you saw the logo, but it explodes.
Oh yeah.
Krackle, and when M.O.D.O.K powers up, there's Kirby Krackle. The first thing Pat and I did is we made sure that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's name were on every script, or in the credits. Because what's the point? Like, there's no M.O.D.O.K without him, or there's no Marvel Universe without them. So Kirby is a huge touchstone, and it was kind of like, when in doubt, with a design question, like, lean towards Kirby was kind of always the note. And it's kind of what Patton and I kind of used as a compass for the series. It's like, what would Kirby do here? So he's all over it.
I mean, I think it's interesting how, for a while, I mean, like, originally when comic movies were really starting to like hit their stride. Like, I remember when X-Men was coming out, and it was, I really enjoyed the first X-Men, but to a certain degree, it seemed like they were trying to not embrace, like, the comic visuals. But then I think that we've slowly progressed to the point where you can have, like, Thor Ragnarok, and it's like Kirby to the max. Yeah. And I like the fact that not only did people, like, not mind the fact that there was Kirby to the max, but they were just all about it. So now that, like, it seems like we're going to get to a different level of Kirby to the max with M.O.D.O.K.
Well, there used to be a comic booky used to be a dirty word.
Yeah,
and it's
totally
the exact opposite. It just means fun and stylistic and kind of heightened to me. And that's what I love about comics, is that's the world that they're set in. So we really tried to capture that with the show. This is a world where a character like M.O.D.O.K exists and lives, and it's filled with, millions of other characters like him. And that was the appeal of doing a Marvel show, is that we wanted to hit every corner, from Asgard, to helicarriers and this and that. Like, those are the backdrops, you want to play on. And we reference it all. So, I think the goal was to create the most comic book Marvel Universe show that has ever been made under Marvel. Because, I think everyone else sometimes has to ground it more, or they're in a different continuity, and ours, we pulled from everywhere. We pulled from movies and video games and animation, but mostly comics. Comics is like the beating heart of the show.
In some ways, it kind of sounds like, at least in terms of the totality, the feel you guys are trying to go for. My wife plays the Lego Marvel, or like Avengers games, and it's really wild watching her play that game, because I'm like, I have never seen a game that, like, more embraced the Marvel Universe than that. Like, on one corner you'll find Squirrel Girl, and then you'll be fighting, M.O.D.O.K, or you'll be doing this, or you'll be doing that. And I was just like, the main villain is King the Conqueror. And I was just like, when I remember watching her, I was just like, how is this the most comic booky thing I've ever seen?
Absolutely. I play all those games with my son, and they're the best, because it's all that history. It's all those little places that have been established in the Marvel Universe. Like I said, we were doing The Bar with No Name. I've been obsessed with since I read that in a Marvel Comics Presents comic of this place where D-list blue collar villains go to get drunk. Mm-hmm. They just got beat up by Spider-Man. And it was like on the top of our list of, like, well, we got to send M.O.D.O.K there. Like, we do a whole episode. It was Patton's episode that he wrote. It was fantastic, where he has, time away from the family. So he realizes he should learn to socialize. So he goes to this more high-end bar with some A-list Marvel villains, and they kind of turn him away. And then he's slumming it at the Bar with No Name.
Oh my God.
Kind of manipulating some of the villains in there to pull off a job that will elevate him. And again, it's like, you want to play in every corner. It's such a fun universe. It's so fully developed. And I feel like, we barely even touched it with how many movies are out there, and they're fantastic. There's so much more to explore. And I think we love that we kind of carved out our section of the Marvel Universe with A.I.M. Because no one's told stories within that organization or with these characters. But again, Marvel was great about like just giving us A-list heroes and villains to come in for an episode or two and be a bigger part of the show. And the stories may start out in a house or an office, but we're off to the races by the second act, embracing all these backdrops of the Marvel universe.
Well, and I don't want to put pre-recording you on blast or anything like that, but you did mention a name that I imagine connects with you quite a bit and also connects with me. You said the Brood. And the fact that the Brood is going to exist in literally anything is like so spectacular, because I don't know whether you're talking about the actual scary versions. Actually, in some ways, you could look at the Brood, like the actual scary versions are like legit. Like those are like the ones that the X-Men deal with. Very scary. But then there's also like Brew. I don't know if you ever read like Jason Aaron's like Wolverine the X-Men. Like you have this prim and proper. Yeah, it's so good. And like they have a spectrum to them too that just feels like it's very fitting to the type of story that you guys are dealing with.
Yeah, I think ours are used a little more serious, but I don't want to ruin. There's a twist to how they're used. So, but there's some other aliens in that one that again we would scour through the Marvel. We had all the handbooks.
Yeah.
In our writer's room, and like I said, a spinner rack, and we would go through the handbooks, and you would find these things where you're like, oh, this thing appeared in 2 issues of Hercules in the 80s, and these things are amazing and they're hilarious, and no one has used these, and we just stumbled upon them, and now they're going to be an integral part of this episode. Or it was such a fun thing to, because Pat and I obviously are huge nerds who live and breathe Marvel, but most of the writing staff, was mixed. There's some people who are fans, some people more casual fans, and some people who didn't know anything about Marvel. And I think that's good because you want it to be a balanced writer's room. But that was fun, was watching them be like, well, what about this? And it's like, well, I know that thing, but oh yeah, you just found a new take on that.
Yeah.
That makes that super funny and super relevant to the story we're telling between our main characters, that we can pull and use that. So, and then, obviously we were trying to be responsible about it, that we didn't shoehorn in every character we just wanted to write. But we did do that with a lot of Easter eggs. Like this, hopefully it's a show you want to rewatch because we packed it. Like it's littered with Easter eggs for Marvel fans. There's one episode where they go into a pawn shop, and I think every object in there is something from the Marvel universe. So that was really exciting too, was to kind of, do that after we had the stories down and we were, telling them the right way. We then gave into our urges to just be like, okay, background stuff, let's throw some stuff in. But again, we played with some of the big toys and found new spins on them, hopefully.
When I was a kid, one of my favorite comics was Peter David and George Perez's Hulk Future Imperfect. I love that. And there was this one scene, like old Rick Jones was like hanging out in this room, and it was just filled with memorabilia, like Iron Man's armor, Wolverine's skeleton, all this stuff like that after everybody had died. And I don't know, there's just something like uniquely satisfying about scenes in comic book related stories where it's just like literally just a room of Easter eggs, which sounds like that's what that pawn shop is.
I'm not bullshitting you or blowing smoke up your ass. We referenced that panel or that sequence. I know which one you're talking about, for a sequence in M.O.D.O.K, like a trophy room. Yes. So I think we're very much on the same page of what we want out of Marvel shows.
So my pitch for the show, I was trying to think of like what comics it crosses over. It's either the Vision or Meet the Skrulls times Next Wave is kind of like the vibe I was thinking of. But I am interested how, like, so just like a couple more questions, like how, you and Patton, big comic fans, you have the writer's room, a mix. What was it just throwing stuff up on a whiteboard or on a screen or whatever and just kind of seeing what sticks and what you can build off of? Or was it a little bit more I don't know, I don't want to say formulated, but it was a little bit more formal than that?
Yeah, no, it's a very heavily serialized show.
Right.
Each episode is its own kind of big adventure, but everything plays into, feeds into the next episode. We have several big bads for the season. You're tracking M.O.D.O.K's relationships, obviously, with his family and Monica and a bunch of the other characters. But there's bigger threats that are growing that he's going to have to confront. Some very recognizable ones, and some other ones that are some deep cuts for your Grant Morrison fans out there. But the idea was we knew the story we wanted to tell, which again, we talked about was a guy who loses everything and has to kind of figure out who he wants to be.
Right.
Now it's all been taken away from him. So that lends itself to, specific kinds of stories, but the way M.O.D.O.K tries to solve his problems is always kind of through, supervillain tactics or, time machines or, traversing the multiverse or, inventing synthesoid characters, he doesn't approach his everyday problems the way maybe a normal dad would or a boss. So that's the fun of the series, I think, is Marvel wanted and we wanted to do something that was kind of in the vein of a Rick and Morty, Archer, kind of American Dad story type, but it's way more heavily serialized than I think some of those shows, and that was really fun because we wanted everyone to invest in it. And I think the most shocking thing might be that the show weirdly has a lot of heart that just kind of came out of these relationships, that even though M.O.D.O.K is this villainous, terrible person, deep down, I think there's a lot that we can relate to. And I think people will enjoy seeing, not to get too political, but to see an egomaniac humbled.
Yeah.
Is something I think we all want. So, I think it was about starting him in a place where he's the recognizable M.O.D.O.K we know from the Marvel Universe, and then putting him through a journey that tests him, and he hopefully comes out a different person.
I think it helps a lot obviously it helps a lot to have a good cast, but you guys have such a great cast in terms of mix of people who are good at comedic performances, but also just generally good performers. Like, the daughter, who I actually think is her name actually Melissa, beyond being Melissa Fumero. I mean, she is absolutely fantastic on Brooklyn Nine-Nine in all facets of that role. And so, like, having somebody like her, or like, Ben Schwartz, who's done really great. I mean, obviously I cannot think of him and not think of Jean-Ralphio, but he's great in everything. And so one character I'm really excited for is Beck Bennett's character as, like, isn't he like, what is it, the CEO of Grumble, which is like the company that takes it over? I mean, like, Beck Bennett, I'm not slandering Beck Bennett, but he's always kind of got like I could see him as like a smarmy CEO type, and there's just like a fit there that just works. And so having somebody a cast filled with people who are both excellent comedic voices, but also can ride that line, I imagine it's going to make your guys' lives much easier. Also, Patton's good too.
Yeah, Patton's amazing. It was we put a lot of thought, obviously, into the casting. I think everyone does when they cast the shows, but we wanted, kind of a mixture of different comedic performances. Some are improvisers, some come from drama, and I think they all kind of brought the perfect energies to the characters. Like, I can't wait for people to see John Daly's super adaptoid, who is this like hyper manic, like stuck at home all day, dreaming of doing great things, desperate for attention, robot who resents M.O.D.O.K but also desperately wants to be loved by him. He's incredible. Yeah, Beck is so funny because Beck is the nicest, sweetest guy and play Swarmy perfectly, and I think was one of the big surprises. Obviously, we knew Beck was hilarious, but that character, what he brought to it, like even the straight lines from that character are like belly laughs for me when I watch it. Sam, we've talked about how it is like this amazing closer that can just kind of come in at the end of a scene and scene blow it with the biggest laugh you'll ever get. And Wendy McClellan-Covey is unbelievable in the show. Like, she's Monica right out of the comics, like her frustration with him and how much she despises him and how evil that character is. But again, we try and find the humanity in her, and we introduce her daughter, who's also from the comics, Carmilla, who was the Scorpion character. We have kind of a take on her. It's just so fun to get these actors that I've just been fans of and then put them together. And then, yeah, the family, Ben Schwartz I'd worked with a bunch, and he was like one of the first people kind of on board, because, I just love writing for him. And he's so perfect as the son, and a great, again, all you want to cast people that are such different energies, and like, he's this happy-go-lucky kid who has this weird unearned confidence because he's the school weirdo, but he loves himself and what he's about. And M.O.D.O.K is this super insecure, stuck in his head kind of character. So again, you want to create these characters that will play off of each other. And then, yeah, Melissa Fumero is I would be shocked if she isn't like leading a Pixar movie in a year. She's one of the best voice actresses I've ever worked with, like gets it so quickly, adds so much to it. Amy Garcia just like grounds the show and has so many funny moments, and also gets to really hold her own, with Patton, and it was nice. There's a few times we got to record a few different actors together in the booth. So we got Amy and Patton in one, and Ben and Patton to play off each other for an episode that was kind of heavy with the two of them. So I just sat back and let him go, and I was like, this is making my job way easier.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I do have to bring up Stupid Buddy Studios. We talked about it a little bit before we started recording. They're the ones who are doing like the stop animation, or this stop motion animation. I know that, style stuff can throw people off to a certain degree, but we were talking beforehand how like people actually seeing footage kind of help people understand what this was really going to be. And I really think it's the right look for it, because as I said before we started recording, M.O.D.O.K is kind of weird, and so kind of leaning into that vibe like fits that, and it just like it also fits the Office comedy part of it. So why was, in your opinion, why was that the right look for the series?
Yeah, it was funny. I really enjoyed Robot Chicken when I was younger, and I think I just knew 2D, so when it was suggested, I was like, I don't know, and then they made this test very early on in the process, and it was unbelievable. It was so cinematic, with this handheld technology they've developed to do these kind of motion controlled rigs and that do natural handheld photography. The puppets were so polished and beautiful and amazing and expressive. It really, to me, it felt so different. Whereas I think Robot Chicken leans into looking like toys, and it's born out of that Twisted Mego theater. This to me was like them doing something very different that felt a lot closer to the Leica style animation. And I was really excited to try something new and experiment with the form. And again, I grew up loving stop motion. Nightmare Before Christmas is one of my favorite movies. And it was something, so new and fresh, and I got to kind of learn this whole new medium. And it was just such a cool way. I think it lends itself to M.O.D.O.K, where it grounds him almost a little bit, but also leans into the absurdity of his design. And I think they found this really cool design sense for all the puppets, where everyone outside of M.O.D.O.K is pretty human and proportional, where him and Melissa look just insane next to these characters in the best way. So it heightened, I think, the physical attributes of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's got like a texture and it feels like they're real objects, which I think really like leans into that grounded feel you guys are kind of going for. Well, I want to bring up one thing that I thought was really cool that you guys are doing. So at the end of each episode, I believe there's going to be ads for M.O.D.O.K head games, the comic you and Scott and Patton are putting together. I think that's fantastic. And then on top of that, you had tweeted that you and Patton were putting together comic playlists about the titles that influenced you around the release of the show, which is even better. It seems to me, I mean, it's abundantly clear that you are a comic fan, no doubt. But is it important to you to make the comics feel like an active part of the roots of the show, even if they both, because, the comic and the show have a lot of overlap, but the comic is its own thing. But is it important even if they work both independently of one another?
Yeah, absolutely. And from day one, it was like, how can we drive people who are interested in the show towards the comics. Comics will always be my first love. And anything to kind of connect these two and get people to seek it out more. I get people in stores or get them, reading online. There's just so much amazing history, and you just want to share it with everyone. So if the show can help that, if the show can say, oh, you like Monica Rappaccini, well, you should go read M.O.D.O.K's 11, or her first appearance in that amazing fantasy series. I think, that was always a big goal for Patton and I, was to connect them as much as possible. Like we even Ryan Panagos and I have become really close, who works over at Marvel, and he even there's a person who has this insane Excel sheet of every universe in the multiverse.
Wow.
And in everything, games, comics, everything. So I was able to name our universe. I got to use my son's birthday, which is 12/26. So we are in the 12/26 universe.
Oh my God.
And it was just such a cool thing to like, it may be silly to some people, but it's like, oh, we're real. We exist in the Marvel multiverse. Like someone could travel from an X-Men comic to our world. We're part of it. And that was really cool and special.
Yeah. I think it's really, there's like, whenever you can kind of make an impact, especially, I mean, as a comic fan, whenever you can make an impact on that broader universe. I know this is a very vain thing to admit, but we were talking about original art before this. 2 of the pages I own are pages that I was on from favorite comics. I was on a page from Morning Glories, and I was on a page from Chew from Rob Guillory and John Layman. And,
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it was like the fact that I'm part of that is like awesome. The fact that you get to actually have you're part of that Excel spreadsheet now. You're part of that broader world. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. As soon as we sold the show, I grew up in New York, so I went back there for Thanksgiving, and I was like, I got to tour the offices. Is that okay? And they set up a tour for me, and it was supposed to be like, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. I was there for like 3 hours. I wouldn't leave. I was just like nerding out with the editors. Like, to me, it's funny. Like, I don't get that starstruck with kind of TV film celebrities that much, but with comic book people, I turn into the Chris Farley show. Like, I don't know how to talk to them. It's because it's what I dedicate most of my time to, is reading their stories. So, it was great. And now I've been able to kind of create relationships with them. Jerry Duggan was a close friend of Patton's and came in when we were doing a punch up on the pilot and was a rock star. And now it's like we become good friends, and I can read Marauders and immediately ask him a question. And it's like, this is almost as good as having, if not better than having a show, It's access to these people who I just have the utmost respect and love for. And it's, that's been a great part of this experience, is getting to interact with them and then doing this comic. Like, I have lost my mind every time I've gotten a page back from Scott or doing a lettering pass, where it's just like, this is something I've been dreaming about for years. And it's such a thrill, and it's such a fun experience. So yeah, obviously I've used it selfishly to force my friendships on all these comic creators, but also, we want to do the same thing. We just, we know that there is this treasure trove of amazing art and stories in these comics. So if, someone who's never read one picks one up because of M.O.D.O.K, then we've done our job.
So I do have to ask, have you enjoyed the process of writing comics? Has it lived up to your hopes and dreams?
It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. I swear. And not to say that like running and writing M.O.D.O.K is less than. That's amazing thrill.
It's just different. It's different.
It's different.
Yeah.
It's the immediacy of it, and it's the yeah, it's the way I've been seeing stories since I was a kid. So to tell one in that format is great, and yeah, it's real and it's tangible, and I'll be able to hold it, I don't know, it's been an amazing year, and I'm so grateful for the opportunities.
I have to say, like, not to make it sound like it's all downhill from here, but it really does feel like all of this M.O.D.O.K goodness that you're involved with right now feels like a perfect distillation of like all of your interests, all of your skills into like one broader family of projects. And it's, I'm not saying that you won't ever have one that you like even more, but it seems pretty nice.
It's the perfect first show. I will say that. I couldn't have asked for more. And yeah, it's you pinch yourself that you're writing dialogue for these characters that are on lunchboxes and action figures, and what I would never take for granted what these characters mean to people, because they mean so much to me. And they've gotten me through hard times, and they're my escape when I need them, and I have such a love for them. So if that is M.O.D.O.K for someone as well, then I hope we deliver that, and I hope people enjoy this kind of fun comedic take. Like, I've loved, Lego Batman to me feels just as good as any other Batman, like a legit great Batman movie. Like, to me, it's about getting the essence of these characters, and I think that's what we're really trying to capture with M.O.D.O.K, but then tell a kind of comedic take on the Marvel Universe that we don't get to see that often.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, as at least the biggest M.O.D.O.K fan that I know, that I'm very excited for your take on this. But Jordan, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about comics, M.O.D.O.K, the potential of Stiltman influencing some world ever, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I could talk comics all day. I don't have much of a comics community, so I'll stay all night. But I appreciate you having me on and letting me babble. And I hope people enjoy the show and the comic.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Jordan Blum. You can find him on Twitter at BloomJordan, and his work in the upcoming M.O.D.O.K Head Games miniseries at Marvel Comics and the upcoming M.O.D.O.K series on Hulu. Off Panel is brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out Sketch, my subscription comic site, for long-form articles, interviews, and more, and consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Herrera, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Sheldon, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitted Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Olive, Paul Slate, Sakil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brennan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Nick Terra, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Paul McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fabian, Kat McKenzie, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Chris Hallren, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Devanakos, Norbert, Niccolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.